Hey, what's going on, beautiful and authentic souls? Welcome back to the second episode of the Sam Powell Podcast. In today's world, the single most important daily habit that everyone should be practicing is a practice of solitude. So the question I want to ask is, when was the last time that you actually sat alone or did something completely alone, where you weren't reaching for your phone, you weren't playing music, you weren't playing a podcast, or you weren't distracting yourself in some way, that you're actually just sitting or just being with your own thoughts? So we live in an environment now. Our modern lives are distraught with constant pings of our phones. We are so distracted all the time. We have apps that are designed to spark dopamine to crazy levels. They're designed to make us addicted to them. We constantly have the background noise of TV or music going on, just people around us. And we have this life of sort of overabundance of consumption. We can see this in the way that we consume food, where sometimes we're eating food out of boredom rather than actually out of necessity, out of hunger. And our typical day will start with waking up, going on our phone, responding to the notifications on there. Then we immediately get into a workplace where we're constantly responding to messages that are being sent to us, email notifications that are coming through, more like phone calls and other notifications. And we're in this cycle of just like constant distraction, constant bombardment of so many like little things. And this gets carried out by all the way to when we get back home, and then to when we get into bed, and we're often sleeping with a phone next to us, where we're scrolling through Instagram or some other social media, and this keeps us up longer than we want to be asleep, and than we want to be awake for. And there's no real point in which our brain is not distracted throughout the day. So in this environment, this is sort of teaching us to then like be in this constant state of distraction, in which we're now acting out a life in which we've become thermometers, where we're reacting to every sort of little input or external input around us, rather than being thermostats in which we're setting the temperature, we're setting the tone for our own lives. And when we do this, when we become so distracted, we're so externally like focused, we become less and less in tune with our own internal world. We lose a sense of authenticity, a sense of control, and we become these sort of rudderless ships, being sort of like tossed by any sort of external wind wave, and we're now sort of at the whim of what is going on around us, rather than being able to sort of set the pace and tone for our own lives. So when we are so externally focused, we sort of lose sight of our own like emotions or our own intentions, and we become so reactive to everyone else's emotions around us. This sort of interrupts our lives, and when we get into this very deep reactionary state, we no longer are ourselves at that point. When we're in this reactionary state, where we no longer have our own consciousness, we're not reacting to our own consciousness, we're no longer in a dialogue of ourselves, we're sort of forsaken our authentic being in this moment. Our existence, our consciousness is being handed over to this sort of synthetic consciousness of everyone else around us, all the other people's like problems, the sort of external stimuli of the world, and this is a very synthetic place to be in. We are taking on the burden of fads of social media, the dramas of mass media, and we're no longer sort of acting in a place of authenticity or in a consciousness that is within ourselves. We're now participating in this synthetic consciousness, similar to how a large language model is set up. The AI that we use, these chat GPTs, are in a way these synthetic consciousnesses, of which like this abundance of data is sort of plugged into it, and they sort of draw connections on the different pieces of data. And that's what occurs when we're in this very deep-seated state of being sort of reactionary to everything else that is around us, when we're no longer depending on our own internal state. So when we are living this reactionary state, when we're always responding to notifications, news, and other people's emotions, where we've sort of reverted into this like herd-like mentality, but in which we're sort of operating like the sort of sheep and the cows, like being sort of pushed through sort of life. But in a way, it's almost darker than that, because unlike sort of animals which are operating on instincts, we're no longer even like operating on our own instincts, because we're so tuned into this external artificial stimuli around us that isn't even natural in a sense. It's not as if we are walking out in the forest or in the ocean or out in nature and so forth and reacting to this like beautiful external organic like stimuli. Instead, we're sort of into this what I mentioned with this like synthetic consciousness, and it's this very like constructed and sort of clinical sort of like herd mentality that we then end up adopting. So instead of being these thermometers, being sort of reactionary to any external stimuli around us, we need to be thermostats. So we need to be setting our own emotional and mental temperature, our attitude for each day. We need to be responding to life with our own intentions rather than reacting impulsively. We need to be able to set our own emotions, our own visions, our own thoughts for the day. And it doesn't matter then what is going on in the external world. We will stay true to our own internal thoughts, our own feelings, our own emotions. When they've been set in this right way, when we've aligned to our own internal being, any obstructions that then come up in the external world on that day, we can then sort of begin to reflect down on ourselves. We can sort of depend on ourselves. We can trust in ourselves more. We can then sort of turn to our own intuition. We can turn to our own wisdom. And when we have a question, when we are confronted with something as we go about our day, we have this opportunity now to look internally for how we feel, for our own opinions and our own ideas on something that occurs. And in this state, we are then acting out this deeper authenticity, this very real authenticity. We are then actually allowing authenticity to unravel itself from us. We're no longer living out the lives of someone else or some other synthetic consciousness that we may like revert to when we've sort of opened ourselves up to this more distracted way of being. So when we are no longer reactionary and we no longer feel as though we're being sort of controlled by the external stimuli in our lives, and we're actually not frightened of our own thoughts, when we're no longer in this reactionary state, when we are setting the intentions, the thoughts, the emotions for our day, we become more resilient to the external world. We become more patient with the things that confront us, more inviting of the challenges and suffering that is presented to us, since we are no longer reacting to these external pressures of the world. They no longer control us. And it actually then becomes an opportunity for us to exercise our peace, our calmness, our authenticity in that moment. And when we become internally focused, our authentic echo starts to then radiate out, and we begin to actually attract other individuals to us, particularly those that are also internally focused, who have that deep-seated sort of sense of calm, or they're not reactionary. And our own sort of consciousness is able to like go forth beyond us and attract other individuals, and their own consciousnesses then sort of begin to pull one another together. And there's this sort of beautiful humility and then simplicity to the way people operate when they are just internally focused, when they're not reactionary, in which their sort of authenticity is able to sort of just exude through them, unfold sort of throughout them. And that, I think, humility and simplicity comes from just not being over that being inundated and overwhelmed with all this external stimuli, this external media, these distractions, these thoughts, these like synthetic consciousness, like advertisements that are just overwhelming our psyche. And there are less things going on in our minds when we are just more internally focused, but there are things that are more known to us, or genuinely known to us. They're more truthful to us, or when things are presented to us, that when there are challenges that we have to confront, there's more opportunity to open the question to not knowing it, to not have to have an answer to it immediately. Because what I think occurs when we are so inundated with these distractions, it almost feels as if we have to have an answer for anything. Whenever we're sort of like approached by an individual with a question, or confronted with something in which we're being accused of or questioned over, I think when we're in that reactionary mindset, we're so quick to sort of like give an answer to, rather than to actually consider it, or even being open to not knowing something. And then that's when you can engage in this dialogue where you're allowing for empty silences to occur, and you're actually sort of like happy for your own sort of ignorance, your own thoughts or emotions to occur, and then also another individual's like unknowing of a situation, to then sort of engage in this very like open dialogue at that point. And so there is this, like, I think, this calm, this simplicity, this authenticity that is then found in your own solitude and calmness in your mind. And why I suggest that this is like the most important habit for people to be practicing now in this current day and age is that I've met so many people that, unfortunately, I suspect this is the case for most people, who are actually frightened of their own thoughts. The thought of being alone for them is overwhelming. And this isn't normal. We should be able to sit with our own thoughts for not just a couple of minutes, but for hours, even like days on end. We should be comfortable enough to be within our own mind, to be having our own internal dialogue. And unfortunately, it's something that I literally hear articulated to me, that people cannot bear the burden of like being in their own. They have to be distracted. And I'm not saying that a fear of being in their own thoughts is unjustified. We all have our own demons. We all have our own skeletons in our closet, and we have traumas. But pushing the snake under the carpet only means that it grows to the size of a dragon eventually, and these dragons cannot be kept under the carpet. And so whether you want to or not, this demon, this dragon that we're pushing under the carpet, will come out at some point, and this will be when we're not actually like willing or able to confront it. It'll come out when it's most destructive, and when we're at our most vulnerable state. So yeah, as I said, it's not that it's necessarily easy to be in solitude, to be within your own mind, to be with your own thoughts, but it is simple. And it is a practice, I think, that maybe start small for some. It may just be 5 minutes at a time. It may be that you have to do some more minorly distracted some tasks, but over time it will become easier, and you'll actually learn to sort of crave this discomfort from being internal, by engaging with your own thoughts. Like, you'll actually find that you'll really crave that opportunity for that tension in your mind when you have to confront something that has been like challenging you, and and this is because your mind is designed to grow from this tension. I mean, this is why we find that monks have the most significant amount of grey matter in their brains, because they are continually putting their mind through that tension, through meditation, of confronting their own thoughts, but confronting solitude without distraction. But yeah, as I said, I've met so many individuals who are quite literally frightened of being in their own thoughts, and to confront their own thinking, and they're scared of having a meaningful conversation with themselves. And some examples of this is people who can't even, say, drive their car home from work without getting on a call with their mum or a friend for that 40-minute drive. Or when they're at home cooking or cleaning, they need to still be on the phone, or they need to have like music or some podcast like going on. And it's... Or they get home from work and they put the TV on immediately to have some bullshit reality TV show like going on in the background while they're doing like other tasks at the time, or they're just sort of like sitting there like on their phone, this like plugging into the matrix of this like absolute like dopamine like rush of distraction, and it's something that's quite challenging for me to even like comprehend, because I can't imagine how crazy I would go being forced into being in a room with like just drivel going on in the background of like a TV of some like bullshit Netflix show. And I see like reels on Instagram of people who like need to go to sleep with like Netflix going on because they just feel like so alone, or they don't want to even be distracted by their thoughts when they're lying in bed. And that is just such a wild concept to me, as they're like hugging their computer as they go to sleep, where even their own thoughts as they're laying there in bed is too overwhelming for them. And it's so dark in my mind, because this means that while this person is like falling asleep, while they're dreaming, then they don't even have the luxury of like their own thoughts, because they're like programming their brain into like whatever it is like they're watching, and that might still be playing on in the background while they're half asleep. And so even their subconscious is being flooded with the content that they've been distracting with themselves. And that, does that mean that even their dreams lack authenticity, and they're pre-programming their subconscious mind to be plugged into the herd mentality? So then people are wondering, like, why are they waking up depressed? Why they're waking up anxious? Why they're waking up scared of their own thoughts? And maybe at this point, like, they don't even like know their own, or they don't even like have their own thoughts, because their heads are so filled with the noise of social media and the other bullshit content that they've been like consuming while they're falling asleep, while they're waking up in the morning, like throughout the day, that they've almost got this like mental virus of just all the shit that they've been consuming. And it just lacks all authenticity. Like there's no authentic being left at this point. It's like no wonder they're fucking scared of being in their own mind. And now I don't want to trivialize the reality that many of us experienced, the trauma and the suffering of our lives that are very real things that aren't part of this like nonsense content that we might be like consuming, or this like trivial distraction that is so abundant in our lives. Because These are things that we may have already dealt with or not dealt with, and they are the things that lurk in the canyons of our minds, in the shadows of our minds, and they're the things that snatch at our feet, and they distract us from the calm in our minds. And so this is very real, and these things do make it more difficult to confront, to sit alone with the things that are going on in our own mind. But we still need to engage with it. We do need to process these things that we experience. I have a bit of a story here that I spent some time living out in this ashram, this like commune like thing out in the forest, and at this ashram, part of the practice of like being there, part of the rules is that there's a lot of silence, there's a lot of solitude, there's no like excess just sort of chit chat and like talking, and throughout the day you're only actually allowed very small periods of maybe like half an hour or so, like when you're eating, that you're sort of allowed to be like talking with others. Outside of that, while you're working or while you're meditating or while you've got say periods of like being alone, you're not actually supposed to be talking or engaging with others. And at this ashram, there were some people that like didn't speak at all, even in these periods where you were sort of allowed to speak and engage with others, and they might have been there for 3 months or longer, in which they wouldn't speak or engage with others during this period. While there were a lot of others who were only there for a shorter period of time, a day, a couple days, like a weekend at most, and I saw several people like implode of some sort or have mental breakdowns when they were forced to sort of confront their own solitude, their own silence, and face their own thoughts. And it was so fascinating to see, because people didn't have the luxury of like their phones. There was no access there was no radio, there was no TV, and even the sort of like work you did throughout the day we weren't working for 16 hours a day, so we were forced into several periods throughout the day of solitude, whether it was like walking in the forest or like being in sort of like some of the ashram like different buildings like completely alone, and like there wasn't books to read. Like people had to face their own thoughts, they had to go internal, they had to speak with themselves. And even the food we were eating there, it was just food that was like grown on this farm, very, very bland, very basic. So there was no means for people to distract themselves, even with like eating as well. And yeah, as I said, I met several individual people here who had breakdowns. One woman who was only going to be there for 3 days, and I met her when she first came in. We had an initial conversation while we were sharing like a meal. She was a middle-aged woman. She had kids, like a husband, and she just said she wanted a break from that to get more in tune with herself. And I kid you not, after I think it was 3 hours at most, and half an hour of this was spent having a meal with me, and then like another maybe like hour or so speaking with some like other people. When she was forced to go out into solitude like on her own, she was told by this vinyasa, this sort of head person at the ashram, that it was now sort of her time to like go internal, to like spend time with herself like out in the forest. After the 3 hours, she left. She got in her car and she left. And this was after she had a mental breakdown, just saying she couldn't. She said she couldn't handle like just being on her own. She couldn't handle like not speaking with anyone. She didn't like the thoughts that she was experiencing. She left. She just got up and left. And then there was another woman that she was there for about a week, and at first she was like totally fine across like the several days, or the first initial days that we were there for. I mean, we were like working a little bit. We had a lot of like cleaning jobs to do and whatnot. But then after like 3 days, of which she was allocated a full day of no work and like no activities or no tasks to do, in which she was forced or encouraged like just to spend time on herself. And after this day, because I didn't speak to her at all on this day, the following day when we were having a meal together, I spoke to her and I asked her about how her day went, and she said that when she'd gone out walking in this like forest, that she'd had a complete mental like breakdown, and that she sat in the forest crying for several hours. And this was because she'd got so overwhelmed with her own thoughts, and what had actually like come out in her like thinking was the unresolved emotions of her father passing several years ago, having committed suicide. Obviously this is not a trivial thing. This is a very overwhelming thing, but that's why I share this story, is it just shows that this wasn't something that she had actually confronted, or it wasn't something that she'd allowed herself to process, to actually like sit with and experience the necessary emotions of this like loss, because she'd never provided that sense of solitude for herself. And it is obviously a very challenging and like difficult thing to do. But coming out of this day, I mean, she was having this very open conversation about what was obviously a very significant like thing to occur to her with someone who was relatively a stranger to her at this point. And she was doing it without crying. She wasn't doing it with being like overwhelmed. It was actually a really just calm and peaceful conversation. And I think that is evidence of which, like, by going to like solitude, she was actually able to sort of like come out of this forest having now a control and an ownership over her own thoughts, over the experiences, over her suffering, of the challenges like in her life. And I think it sort of shows as well that when you look internally, you're able to sort of like cleanse your soul of the shadows that may be present there, of this sort of like undealt trauma, or the distractions that may be present in your mind. And I think so in saying that, like, we have to learn not to be scared of our own thoughts, and to embrace the challenge of wrestling with them, because that is where growth is found. That is where we start to provide more room for our authentic being to come forth. Otherwise, we do just become these kind of these sort of possessed beings by all the distraction, or by like our traumas, where we can never actually like move beyond them. There is no room for our authenticity to actually like grow, and then to echo and sort of radiate outwards at that point. And when I was initially thinking about this, it raised like another idea around me. Right? If we can't communicate with ourselves, how do we expect to communicate with others? Like, so let me repeat that again. Like, if we cannot engage in a dialogue with ourselves, if we cannot open up to ourselves, to our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own ideas, how can we possibly be available to the thoughts, feelings, emotions, and ideas of others? If our own emotions and thoughts are being blocked out, if we've plugged into this like herd mentality, we can only offer a very shallow and synthetic conscious like engagement with another person. Since it's not our authentic being that is engaging with this other person, it's this synthetic collective consciousness that is engaging with them. It's not you. The only responses that you can provide are reactionary. You're reacting to this like person in front of you, not in this like authentic way. It's the things that have already possessed your mind. It's this like bullshit content that which might already like be in there, and if there's no if there's no space in our mind, if that means like we can't actually like afford this person the attention they deserve, the compassion they deserve, because there's no space in our mind to actually like absorb and be empathetic to their emotions, to their thoughts, to their like feelings. And because in a way it's like you're not even there, and they're being fed into this like reactionary mind and being sort of spat out the other side of it, and no one's benefiting from this experience. No one's having any positive like impact from this conversation. And I think we've all experienced that moment in which you sort of like you meet and you speak with someone and you feel as though you're in their absolute attention, in which like the sort of external world around them just doesn't exist. They're so focused on you, and it's like you may even experience this yourself, where like after several hours of like being with someone, you don't even realize like how much time has passed by. And when this happens, or I think when this often most happens, it's when it's with those who we trust the most. It's when we can sort of like pull off this mask, or we can break down these like barriers. It's when we can sort of like, I think, dissolve all that distraction that's going on in our mind, dissolve that tension that makes us so reactionary to other people or the things going on around you. And that is the state that we want to be striving to be in. And it doesn't have to just be afforded to those that we trust. Like we can do that with strangers, and that's when we can have these like amazing experiences, or be open to like meeting new people. But that only comes when we practice solitude, when we can communicate with ourselves, when we can communicate with our own thoughts, when we can have open dialogue with our own feelings, our own thoughts, rather than like brushing it under the rug. Because when we can afford that type of consideration for ourselves, that's when we can provide that same space and considerations for others when they share with us. So I want to provide some practical solutions here, or practical means of how solitude can be experienced, how it can be practiced. And the most common ones might be meditating, journaling, walking, exercise, even doing like basic household chores and cooking. And the point being that whichever form of solitude you practice, it must be done without distraction. And the point being that whichever form of solitude you practice, it must be done without distraction. If you are going to be meditating, don't do it with a guided meditation or with like music going on in the background. If you're going to be like journaling, again, don't do it with like music like going on, or with like TV going on in the background. If you're going to be walking, do not do it with like music playing through like earphones. Don't do it with like another person. If you're going to be exercising, don't do it with music going on. Don't do it with like a TV in front of you. If you're doing basic household chores, or you're cooking, don't do it with music or a podcast or like TV going on in the background. Or like if you're doing it with other people, that doesn't count as solitude. That isn't going to be your practice as solitude as well. For some, and I just want to explain as well, like because the thought of being in your own thoughts, to confront your own thoughts, to be in a dialogue with yourself may be overwhelming for you, or may be so frightening for so many of you. The reason why I recommend some of these like other practices of solitude, like cooking or like household like chores or like walking, is because there is some minor distraction in there. That you're doing a task, and I think that just makes it a more gentle process to be able to sit with yourself, rather than just sitting there, or like journaling, which may be overwhelming. And I think something like walking is one of my favorite practices, because I think there's just something so deeply human about walking, about being outside, like in nature. And, you know, I think it's fine if like there's other people walking around you and like there's little minor moments of distraction, because I think it can even just inspire little thoughts in your mind that then you get to actually enjoy and you get to engage with, and you're engaging with it in a really authentic way. And I think there's something about like walking where you can almost like walk through, or like that process of just being like mobile, I think helps you like process things that might be like overwhelming for you, or they might be like traumatic, because there's almost this physical effect of which you're able to sort of like walk on or walk forward from those experiences. And I think it's just when like we're almost at our like most creative beings when we're doing something like walking. There's something about just like the elevated heart rate, like the blood flowing around you. It's where some of my most creative ideas have come from. It's where I feel like I've found answers to like things in my life that I might have been like striving for, or just like thought were such like clearly defined like goals, or like things I had to have. And then when I was walking, just having this like immense realization how like fake or like that idea had just come from such a synthetic or fake place. But yeah, for those of you that are overwhelmed at those thoughts, I think doing things like household chores, like whether it's doing like your ironing or like cleaning up after dinner, like can be a great place just to start with this practice of solitude. And then when I bring up something like exercise, where it might not be obvious that that's a practice of solitude, but when you're doing, say, something like cycling, or you're on a treadmill, or if you have the luxury of being in a gym that doesn't have like music going on, when you're intention, but I think it particularly is quite powerful when you're doing like an aerobic activity. There's something about putting yourself through a sense of discomfort without the distraction of like some other pleasure, which forces you to confront those feelings of discomfort. And it's so obvious, like those other distracted or like negative thoughts that are like going on in your mind, and you can see the sort of tricks your mind is playing, which is telling you to give up or to like stop what you're doing. And when you can sort of work through that, the more authentic self, I think, tends to like bleed through. Then it becomes like more obvious who is like the real you, rather than this sort of external world, these sort of distracted thoughts that then come forth onto yourself. And yeah, to do this without music, I'm not saying it's not hard or it's not challenging, but it is simple. It is simple to do. Journaling, I think, is extremely powerful, because more often than not, like our thoughts are conceptual, they're visual. Whereas when you're journaling, you're really forced to articulate your thoughts. They become so much more real when they're written out, when they're articulated in real words. They become, I think, a lot more clear, a lot more powerful at that point. And our thoughts and emotions can be almost like translucent. They lack that vividness that is required to process them completely, which is often the state they're left in when we're distracting ourselves, or when we're not sort of putting our thoughts into actual words when they're written down. And so there's nowhere to hide when you're writing. Everything is out on the page, and that's where it's sort of become like a go-to practice for me. And I love it. And I love the sort of tension that occurs when I am having to engage with something I know has been like bothering me, or I know has like something might be almost like tricking me in a sense, or I know that I've maybe like subscribed or pick up an idea that isn't mine. And it's where then I'm forced to actually like write it out. And, if I don't have actually much to write about it, something, I sort of get the sense of, you know what, maybe this never was generally my idea, or I have just picked this up from somewhere, and I might have been believing in something I didn't have much substance or reason to be like believing in. And so I think then coming to actually like meditating, and it's not something I do all that much. I find I can sort of like meditate while I'm like exercising in a way, and that cleanses my mind more sort of like quickly than like meditating ever would, but it is really good just to cleanse, I think, the mind, and it provides this sort of resilience to confront our own thoughts when we're engaging with them. So one thing to consider, especially if you are the type of person who is scared of being in their own thoughts, is overwhelmed by the idea of just like sitting in silence, being in like solitude, is that you probably shouldn't expect yourself to be able to sit alone in your own thoughts for hours or days on end, especially if you've been living a life that is a distracted life, which for so many years. Unless you're sort of wanting to almost quit cold turkey, this distracted life, and you're willing to sort of face what could be like some traumatic or challenging thoughts that overwhelm your mind. I mean, I'm sure you would come out of it the other side a completely different person, and I think all the better for it. But for those that are scared of their own thoughts, there are very small steps that you can make to start to like train this mental muscle. And it might just be, sitting alone 10 minutes at a time. And that is the point of a practice, that it is a habit that should just be done consistently, and over time you will get better at it. And hopefully you will get to a point where you actually start to crave it, and spending a full week in solitude is not something you're frightened of, but actually a meaningful challenge where you can do meaningful work, productive sort of self-development in. And so as a closing thought to this, I'd like to share that solitude is where authenticity is found. It is where we process the past, navigate the present, and create the future. So start small, stay consistent, embrace the discomfort. This is a sign of growth. We want to be able to maximize the state of mind in which we are most in tune with the internal self, with my most authentic self, your true being. And just as another final note on that, one of the day-to-day ways I sort of strive for this is to avoid the things that I will engage with, that will distract me, that will sort of spike my dopamine and throw me into this like herd mentality, this distracted mindset. And we want to capitalize on when we first wake up in the morning, when we're still in this like dream-like state, when we're still experiencing the residual effects of the dreams we've been in, because this is when we're our most calm, our most introspective, our most creative. And so it's worthwhile to elongate this state of mind for as long as possible. This is why it's so critical not to sleep with a phone in your bedroom or to use technology for as long as possible in the morning. Maintaining yourself in this deep thinking state of mind for as long as possible will set the peace and intention for the day for yourself. This is where your authenticity will grow. This is will allow for it to surface throughout the day interrupted. So as I mentioned before, solitude is where authenticity is found. It is where we process the past, navigate the present, and create the future. So thank you again for tuning in, guys, to the second episode of the Sam Powell Podcast. We'll see you on the next one.